A billionaire buys an 18-year-old girl at a secret auction, just to set her free. Everyone thinks he's lost his mind, until the girl steps into his home, trembling, broken, and hiding scars that tell a story money could never erase. He says it's charity. She says it's too late for miracles. But when he sees what she's been through, he freezes. Not from desire, but from guilt. Because her pain looks exactly like the one he's been running from all his life. Now the world thinks he's her captor. The press is tearing him apart, and she's the only one who can prove the truth. But as dark secrets come to light, did he save her life, or did she come to save his? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The amber lights cast a deceptive warmth across the Nashville ballroom's polished floors, but Mateo Rowe felt only coldness seeping through his bones. He sat rigid in his chair, watching champagne flutes sparkle and diamonds glitter as Tennessee's elite buzzed around him like well-dressed locusts. Their laughter echoed hollow against the carved ceiling, making his stomach turn. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice sliced through the murmur, "our next sponsorship opportunity?" Mateo's fingers tightened around his untouched glass. He'd seen enough charity sponsorship auctions to recognize their true nature. The glossy brochures spoke of providing opportunities to vulnerable youth, but the predatory glances exchanged told a different story. The spotlight swung to the stage, and his heart stopped. A young woman in a plain cotton dress stood there, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, and her eyes— Mateo couldn't look away from her eyes. They were focused somewhere far beyond the ballroom walls, as if she'd found a way to be anywhere but here. "Olivia Madden, 18 years old," the auctioneer announced, his voice oily with false warmth. "Currently employed as a maid, but showing great potential for advancement." Whispers rippled through the crowd like snakes. Mateo watched the girl, Olivia, flinch almost imperceptibly at each word. Her shoulders were drawn tight, but she held herself straight, dignified even in her fear. "Shall we start the bidding at $10,000? Hands shot up around the room. Mateo remained still, studying Olivia's face. There was something in her quiet strength that reminded him painfully of Sarah, his sister, gone now 10 years. Sarah, who he'd failed to protect. $50,000, called out a man whose reputation Mateo knew all too well. The bidding climbed higher, and with each number Olivia seemed to retreat further into herself. Her fingers worked against each other, the only visible sign of her distress. 100,000. Another voice drawled. Mateo's mind raced through calculations, not of money, he had more than enough of that, but of consequences. He'd come tonight to observe, to gather evidence for his ongoing investigation into these charitable organizations. Getting involved personally would complicate everything. 150,000 going once. Olivia's eyes finally dropped to her shoes, and in that moment of defeated acceptance, Mateo saw Sarah again. He saw every young person who'd ever been treated as a commodity rather than a soul. His hand rose before he could second-guess himself. $1 million. The ballroom fell silent. Even the crystal chandeliers seemed to stop tinkling. Olivia's head snapped up, her eyes finding his through the spotlight's glare. "$1 million from Mr. Mateo Rowe." The auctioneer stumbled, his practiced smoothness cracking. "Going once." No one dared challenge the bid. They knew his reputation, his wealth, his power, but they didn't know his purpose. "Sold!" The gavel crack echoed like a gunshot. Mateo stood, straightening his suit jacket. "I'm buying her freedom," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Nothing more. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. Questions began to fly. Matteo ignored them all, making his way to the stage where Olivia stood frozen, her eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. "Come with me," he said quietly, offering his hand. "You're safe now." She hesitated, studying his face. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she placed her trembling hand in his. He led her through the chaos of reporters and society vultures, shielding her from their questions and cameras. Outside, rain fell in a silver curtain, drumming against the pavement. Matteo guided Olivia to his waiting car, opening an umbrella to protect her from the downpour. She slid into the passenger seat without a word, her cotton dress already dampened by the Tennessee rain. As they pulled away from the curb, reporters pressed against the tinted windows, their camera flashes creating a strobing effect. Matteo drove in silence, watching the city lights blur and fade in his rearview mirror. Beside him, Olivia sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked windshield. The quiet between them was heavy with unspoken questions. Matteo could feel her confusion, her fear, her cautious hope. But he also sensed that she, like him, needed this silence, needed these moments to process the sudden turn their lives had taken. The wipers kept steady time as they left Nashville behind, sweeping away rain and the last echoes of that corrupt ballroom. In the darkness of the car, Matteo caught glimpses of Olivia's reflection in the passenger window. She was so young, yet her eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen too much, too soon. The rain fell harder now, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Streetlights passed in regular intervals, briefly illuminating their faces before letting shadows reclaim them. Each flash revealed Olivia's features gradually relaxing, though her hands remained tightly clasped. Matteo wanted to explain everything. Why he'd been there tonight, why he'd intervened, what would happen next. But he recognized the fragility of this moment. Sometimes silence was the greatest kindness you could offer someone who'd just escaped a nightmare. So they drove on through the rain, two strangers bound together by an act of unexpected redemption, while Nashville's lights faded behind them like dying stars. The rain had settled into a gentle mist by the time Matteo turned onto the winding gravel road. Ancient oaks lined the path, their branches creating a natural tunnel in the darkness. The headlights caught droplets of water clinging to leaves, making them sparkle like tiny stars. After 2 hours of driving, the cottage finally emerged from the shadows. It wasn't grand like his other properties, just a 2-story structure built from weathered stone and timber, with warm light glowing from its windows. Matteo had designed it himself years ago, when he needed an escape from board meetings and shareholder demands. "We're here," he said softly, breaking their long silence. Olivia stirred beside him, her fingers tightening around the small bag in her lap, her only possession. She peered through the windshield at the cottage, her face a careful mask that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Matteo parked near the front door and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy between them. He watched as Olivia took in her surroundings, the sprawling porch, the carefully tended flower beds, the way the cottage seemed to grow naturally from the Tennessee wilderness. "Let's get you inside," he said, reaching for his umbrella. "It's been a long night." She followed him up the stone path, her footsteps whisper quiet behind him. On the porch, he keyed in the security code and pushed open the heavy wooden door. Warm air rushed out to meet them, carrying the scent of cedar and pine. The great room welcomed them with soft lamplight and a fire already crackling in the stone hearth. His property manager had prepared everything as requested. Olivia stood just inside the doorway, clutching her bag like a shield against her chest. "You can set your things down," Matteo said, shrugging off his suit jacket. "Make yourself comfortable." She didn't move. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. The comfortable furniture, the shelves lined with books, the large windows looking out into the darkness. She seemed to be searching for something, perhaps trying to understand what this place meant for her future. Matteo watched her, recognizing the wariness in her stance. He'd seen it before in rescue dogs, in wounded animals, that mixture of hope and fear, unable to trust that safety was real. "Olivia," he said gently, keeping his distance, "I need you to understand something. You're free now. No conditions, no debts." Her eyes snapped to his face, searching for deception. Finding none, she looked away quickly, her shoulders tense. "Nobody buys what they don't want," she whispered, the words barely audible over the crackling fire. Her fingers tightened on her bag until her knuckles went white. The raw truth in her words hit Matteo like a physical blow. Of course she would think that. Her whole life had probably taught her that everything came with a price, that kindness always had hidden motives. He crossed the room slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, and retrieved a shopping bag from behind the sofa. He'd had his assistant prepare it earlier. Simple, practical clothing in soft fabrics and neutral colors. "These are for you," he said, setting the bag on the coffee table between them. "New clothes, toiletries, whatever you might need. You can start again here." Olivia stared at the bag as if it might bite her. After a long moment, she took a tentative step forward, then another. When she reached for the bag, her hand trembled slightly. "The bathroom is through there," Matteo said, gesturing to a door off the main room. "Take all the time you need." She retreated into the bathroom, closing the door softly behind her. Through the slight gap at the bottom, Matteo could see her shadow moving, hear the rustle of fabric. He hadn't meant to look. He'd turned away to give her privacy, but a slight movement caught his eye. The door hadn't latched properly, leaving a thin crack. Through it, he caught a glimpse that stopped his heart. Scars. Dozens of them, crisscrossing Olivia's back like a cruel map. Old burn marks, some round and deliberate. Raised welts that could only have come from a whip or belt. The physical record of years of abuse written on her young skin. The room suddenly felt airless. In his mind's eye, he saw Sarah's arms, covered in fingerprint bruises she'd tried to hide with long sleeves. He saw her fake smile when he'd asked if everything was okay, heard her voice insisting she was fine, just clumsy, always clumsy. Matteo stumbled toward the front door, desperate for air. The night wrapped around him like a cold blanket as he stepped onto the porch. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles white with tension. "Not again," he muttered, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't watch this happen again." The words dissolved into the darkness, swallowed by the sound of wind in the trees and distant thunder. But the images wouldn't fade. Sarah's bruises, Olivia's scars, the endless cycle of violence that seemed to follow him, no matter how much money or power he accumulated. He stood there in the darkness, breathing in the damp night air, trying to steady himself. Behind him, the cottage waited with its warm lights and crackling fire, sheltering a young woman whose trust had been shattered so many times she couldn't believe in freedom anymore. Thunder rolled again, closer now. The trees whispered secrets to each other in the wind. And Matteo Rowe, who had built empires and moved markets with a single word, found himself facing a challenge that no amount of money could solve. How to prove to a broken soul that sometimes, very rarely, salvation came without strings attached. Morning light crept through the cottage windows, painting pale squares on the hardwood floor. The kitchen, with its worn pine cabinets and copper pots hanging from the ceiling, filled with the subtle sounds of someone trying very hard to be quiet. Olivia moved like a shadow through the space, her borrowed sweater hanging loose on her thin frame. The garment, a soft shade of grey, made her seem even smaller, more fragile. Her movements were precise, careful, as she spooned oatmeal into 2 ceramic bowls. Steam rose from the pot on the stove, carrying the faint scent of cinnamon. She'd found the spice in one of the cabinets and added just a pinch, her hand hesitating before she sprinkled it in. Now she stirred each bowl with methodical attention, keeping her eyes fixed downward. Matteo watched from the doorway, noting how she seemed to fold in on herself, trying to take up as little space as possible. The morning light caught the wisps of hair that had escaped her simple ponytail, creating a sort of halo effect that made her look even younger than her 18 years. "Good morning," he said softly, trying not to startle her. She jumped slightly anyway, her shoulders tensing. "Good morning, sir," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Please, just Matteo is fine." He stepped into the kitchen, maintaining a careful distance. "You didn't have to cook." Olivia's hands tightened around the wooden spoon she held. "I wanted to," she said, still not meeting his eyes. "It's not much, just oatmeal. It smells wonderful." He tried to catch her eye, to establish some kind of connection. "Did you sleep well?" The question hung in the air, met with silence. After a long moment, Olivia gave a slight nod, but her posture suggested otherwise. Dark circles under her eyes hinted at a restless night. "The cinnamon was a nice touch." Matteo tried again, accepting the bowl she handed him. "Where did you learn to cook?" Another silence stretched between them. Olivia moved to the sink, beginning to clean the pot with intense focus. "Here and there," she finally murmured, the words so quiet they almost disappeared into the sound of running water. Matteo sat at the small kitchen table, watching as she scrubbed at already clean dishes. Her movements were mechanical, practiced, the motions of someone who had learned early that idle hands were dangerous. "You don't need to do that," he said gently. "Come sit, eat your breakfast while it's warm." She hesitated, then slowly turned off the water. With visible reluctance, she took a seat across from him, perching on the edge of the chair as if ready to flee at any moment. Her spoon moved through the oatmeal, but very little made it to her mouth. "I could help," she said suddenly, her voice trembling slightly. "Around the cottage, I mean. I'm good at cleaning, and I can cook more than just oatmeal. I know how to garden too if you have one." "Olivia." Matteo set down his spoon, choosing his words carefully. "You don't owe me anything. You're not here to work." Her hands began to shake, causing the spoon to clatter against the bowl. "I'm not a thing to be freed," she said, and though her voice quivered, there was steel beneath the words. "I'm a person who needs purpose. Please, I need to be useful." The conviction in her voice startled him. For the first time that morning, she looked directly at him, and the raw need in her eyes made his chest ache. He saw it then. How dignity and purpose were tangled together in her mind, how the ability to contribute was linked to her sense of self-worth. "All right," he said slowly. "If it's important to you, we can find ways for you to help. But only what you want to do, when you want to do it, and you'll rest when you need to." Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by determination. She stood up, leaving her barely touched breakfast. "I can start now. The living room needs dusting. And those windows—" "After you finish eating," Matteo interrupted firmly. She sank back down, took 2 small bites, then pushed the bowl away. "I'm finished." He wanted to protest, to insist she eat more, but he recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Not yet. For the next hour, Olivia moved through the cottage like a quiet whirlwind. She dusted shelves, straightened cushions, and attacked the windows with singular focus. Matteo tried to work on his laptop, but found himself watching her instead, noting how her movements grew increasingly unsteady. It happened while she was reaching up to clean a high corner. One moment she was stretching, dust cloth in hand, and the next she was swaying. The cloth fluttered to the floor as her knees buckled. Matteo caught her before she hit the ground, his heart hammering in his chest. She felt impossibly light in his arms, like a bird with hollow bones. Her face was pale, her skin clammy to the touch. "Olivia?" He patted her cheek gently, but got no response. Guilt churned in his stomach as he carried her down the hallway to her room. He should have insisted she eat more, should have seen how exhaustion and hunger were eating away at her strength. The worn sweater had slipped off one shoulder, revealing collarbones that stood out too sharply under her skin. He laid her carefully on the bed, pulling a quilt over her still form. Her breathing was steady, but her face looked drawn even in unconsciousness. Standing there, watching her chest rise and fall, he felt the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on his shoulders. "I couldn't save my sister," he whispered to the quiet room. "But maybe—" The words trailed off, the thought too fragile to complete. Outside, winter wind pressed against the windows, its soft howl a lonely sound in the morning light. Inside, Olivia slept on, unaware of the man who stood guard over her rest, his hands clenched at his sides, his mind full of memories he couldn't change and a future he couldn't predict. The wind continued its mournful song, whispering secrets about pain and healing, about the long road from broken to whole. In the cottage's quiet, time seemed to pause, holding its breath, waiting to see what would grow from these fragile beginnings. Consciousness returned slowly to Olivia, like waves lapping at the shore. The first thing she noticed was the softness beneath her, so different from the hard floors she'd grown used to. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the gentle light filtering through lace curtains. A wooden tray sat on the bedside table, steam rising from a bowl of golden soup. Next to it, a delicate china teacup held what smelled like chamomile tea. A folded piece of paper caught her attention. She reached for it, her hands still slightly shaky. "Rest, I'll be back by noon." The handwriting was neat, but clearly masculine, all straight lines and sharp angles. Olivia sat up carefully, memories of her earlier collapse washing over her. Heat crept into her cheeks at the thought of fainting, of being so weak. But the soup's aroma drew her attention, and her empty stomach made itself known. She ate slowly, savoring each spoonful of the rich chicken soup. The tea was perfectly sweetened with honey, and its warmth spread through her chest like a gentle embrace. Once finished, she stood testing her legs. They felt steady enough. The quiet of the cottage beckoned, and for the first time, she felt safe enough to really look around. The hallway held framed photographs, landscapes mostly, mountains and forests captured in morning light. But as she moved into the living room, other pictures caught her eye. Family photos, she realized. A younger Matteo smiled from several of them, his face softer somehow, less burdened. In nearly every picture, a girl stood beside him. She looked about Olivia's age, with long dark hair and bright eyes that seemed to dance even in still images. Her smile was infectious, the kind that made you want to smile back even through a photograph. Olivia's attention was drawn to a grand piano tucked into the corner. Dust had settled thick on its surface, but something about it called to her. She lifted the cover carefully, revealing ivory keys that looked untouched for years. Her finger pressed one key, then another. The notes rang out clear and true, despite the piano's neglect. A guitar case leaned against the wall nearby, its leather worn and cracked with age. The whole room felt like a museum of memories, preserved but untouched. Everything spoke of life interrupted, of joy suspended in time. She was still standing there when the front door opened. Matteo stomped snow from his boots, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the scent of winter. "You're up," he said, his voice careful. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she answered softly. "Thank you for the soup and tea." He nodded, unwinding his scarf. His eyes tracked to where she stood by the piano, and something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "Who's the girl in the picture?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. She gestured to the nearest photo, where the dark-haired girl was laughing, her arms thrown around a younger Matteo's neck. The color drained from his face so quickly that Olivia took a step back, apologies already forming on her lips. But he held up a hand, stopping her. "My sister," he said quietly. "Camilla." He moved closer to the photo, his fingers hovering over the glass but not quite touching it. "She died when she was 18. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Olivia's hand unconsciously moved to her own arm, where similar scars to the ones she'd glimpsed in her brief time in captivity lay hidden beneath her sleeve. That night, after a quiet dinner where neither of them ate much, Matteo retreated to his study. Sleep eluded him, and when it finally came, it brought dreams he'd been trying to forget for years. Camilla stood before him, but the marks on her skin were wrong. They were Olivia's scars, Olivia's pain written on his sister's flesh. In the dream, she reached for him, her eyes full of forgiveness he didn't deserve. "You couldn't save me," she whispered, "but you can still help her." He woke with a start, his heart pounding. The study was dark, his laptop long since gone to sleep. Outside his window, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in watercolor grays. Movement caught his eye. On the front porch, Olivia was sweeping snow away with careful, methodical strokes. She wore one of the warm sweaters he'd bought her, her hair caught up in a simple knot. Steam rose from a mug she'd set on the porch railing. She'd made coffee, figured out the kitchen on her own. Something shifted in his chest as he watched her. For so long, he'd seen ghosts of Camilla in every young woman he tried to help, every life he tried to save with his money and influence. But Olivia wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a reminder of his failure, of the sister he couldn't protect. She was her own person, strong despite her wounds, determined despite her fears. In her quiet resilience, he saw not what he had lost, but what he might help rebuild. Not redemption bought with money, but earned through understanding and care. The sound of the broom continued its steady rhythm, and Olivia paused to take a sip of her coffee. She didn't notice him watching, didn't see the moment understanding dawned in his eyes. She simply continued her self-appointed task, making her own small mark on this place that had become her sanctuary. Matteo stood at the window, letting this new perspective settle into his bones. The weight of guilt he'd carried for so long began to shift, not lifting entirely, but changing shape. Perhaps helping Olivia find her way forward could help him find his own path as, well. The morning light grew stronger, turning the swept snow to diamonds. Inside the cottage, the ghosts of the past began to fade, making room for something new to grow in their place. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cottage's kitchen floor as Olivia prepared breakfast. After a week of peaceful routine, she'd grown more comfortable moving through the space, knowing which cabinet held the plates and where Matteo kept his favorite coffee mug. She was setting a plate of scrambled eggs on the table when she heard his sharp intake of breath from the living room. The newspaper he'd been reading crinkled loudly as his hands tightened. "Matteo," she called softly, worry creeping into her voice. He didn't answer immediately. When she stepped into the doorway, she found him staring at the newspaper's front page, his jaw clenched. The headline screamed in bold letters, Billionaire buys girl at humanitarian auction. Olivia's stomach dropped. The eggs she'd just eaten turned to lead in her stomach as she read the rest of the headline. Below it was a grainy photo of her on that terrible night, looking small and scared on the auction stage, with Matteo's figure prominent in the foreground. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her hands beginning to shake. "I've ruined everything." Matteo looked up, his expression softening when he saw her distress. "No, Olivia, you haven't ruined anything." He folded the paper deliberately, setting it aside. "This isn't your fault." Before he could say more, his phone began to ring. Then again. And again. Each call brought more urgency, more demands for explanations. Through the window, they could see cars beginning to gather at the property's gate, news vans with satellite dishes, reporters with cameras. How did they find us? Olivia pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. "They always do," Matteo replied grimly. He answered the next call, his voice clipped and professional. "Yes, Richard. I understand the board's concern. I'll be on the video call in 30 minutes. After hanging up, he turned to Olivia. "I need to handle this. Will you be okay?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. As he disappeared into his study, she sank onto the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. Through the windows, she could see more vehicles arriving, their occupants testing the gates, calling out questions that couldn't penetrate the thick glass. From the study, she could hear Matteo's voice rising and falling as he defended his actions to his company's board members. Words like scandal and reputation and shareholders drifted through the walls. "This is a PR nightmare, Ro." One voice boomed loud enough for her to hear clearly. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about saving a life." Matteo responded, his tone level but firm. "If that costs us some points on the stock market, so be it." Hours passed. Olivia tried to keep busy, cleaning already spotless surfaces, reorganizing books that didn't need organizing. Each time she glanced outside, there seemed to be more reporters. Their cameras glinted in the winter sun like predators' eyes. When Matteo finally emerged from his study, exhaustion lined his face. He loosened his tie and dropped heavily onto the couch beside her. "The board wants me to issue a statement," he said, running a hand through his hair. "They think we need to control the narrative." His laugh was bitter, as if explaining goodness to people determined to see evil would make any difference. Olivia watched his profile in the fading daylight. This man who had given her safety, who had asked nothing in return, was now facing public scrutiny and professional consequences because of her. The weight of it pressed on her chest until she could hardly breathe. "I should leave," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I'm causing too much trouble. Your reputation, your company." "No." His response was immediate and firm. He turned to face her fully. "Listen to me, Olivia. If you run every time the world misunderstands goodness, you'll never heal." The words struck her like a physical force. She blinked back tears, remembering all the times she'd run before, from foster homes, from help, from hope itself. "But they're saying such terrible things about you," she protested weakly. "Let them," he said. "Their opinions matter far less to me than your recovery." He stood, straightening his shoulders. "I'm going to make us some dinner. Would you like to help?" They prepared the meal together in comfortable silence, moving around each other in the kitchen, as if they'd done it for years instead of days. Outside, the reporters remained, but their presence seemed less threatening now, reduced to background noise by Matteo's steady presence and unwavering support. After dinner, Matteo bid her good night, leaving her alone with her thoughts in the living room. She curled up in the window seat, watching as snow began to fall, dusting the trees and covering the intruding vehicles in a blank white sheet. For the first time since she was a small child, Olivia felt the urge to pray, The words came hesitantly at first, rusty from disuse. "Lord," she whispered, her breath fogging the cold window, "if you sent him, help me not to be afraid." She paused, watching a snowflake spiral past. "And thank you for giving me someone who understands that healing takes more than just being saved. It takes being stayed with." The snow continued to fall, erasing the day's harsh edges, softening the world outside until it matched the peace she was slowly finding within. Days settled into a gentle rhythm at the cottage, even as the outside world churned with speculation and scandal. Each morning, Matteo would leave before dawn, his expensive car crunching over the frozen gravel as he headed into Nashville to manage the fallout from his decision. Olivia found peace in the quiet hours alone. She'd wake early to prepare his coffee and a simple breakfast: oatmeal with honey, whole wheat toast, fresh fruit when she could get it. They rarely spoke during these morning moments, but the silence held a comfortable understanding. After he left, she'd begin her self-appointed tasks around the cottage. The physical work helped ground her, gave structure to days that had once been chaotic and uncertain. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, reorganized cupboards that didn't need organizing, and found satisfaction in the simple act of caring for a space that had offered her shelter. One particularly cold morning, she discovered the small greenhouse attached to the back of the cottage. Though winter had claimed most of the garden outside, a few hardy plants still clung to life under the glass. Olivia spent hours carefully pruning dead leaves, adjusting the heating system, and researching winter gardening on the tablet Matteo had left for her use. "You don't have to do all this," he'd tell her when he returned in the evenings, his tie loosened, shoulders heavy with the day's battles. "I know," she'd reply softly. "I want to." The routine brought healing to them both, though neither said it aloud. Matteo would return from days filled with defensive interviews and damage control to find warm meals waiting, fresh flowers on the table, even if they were just hardy winter blooms, and a sense of home he hadn't felt since Camilla died. One afternoon, while dusting the study's bookshelves, Olivia found a worn leather notebook tucked between two business volumes. The pages were filled with handwriting that danced across the lines, song lyrics, poetry, random thoughts. At the bottom of each page was a simple signature: Camilla R. Olivia's hands trembled as she realized what she'd found. She knew she should put it back, but something in the words called to her. Many of the songs were unfinished, trailing off mid-verse, or with notes in the margins about possible changes. Without really meaning to, she began adding her own lines, finishing thoughts that Camilla had left incomplete. The words came easily, flowing from some deep place inside her that understood the longing in those half-finished verses. Days passed, and the notebook became her secret companion. She'd work on it during quiet afternoons, singing softly to herself as she tried different melodies for the words. The songs spoke of hope, of pain, of finding light in darkness, themes that resonated deeply with her own journey. One evening, lost in the music, she didn't hear Matteo's car return. She sat in the window seat, Camilla's notebook open on her lap, singing one of the newly completed songs in a soft, clear voice. Through the shadows of yesterday, light breaks like a promise kept. In the healing of today, grace finds what sorrow left. The sound of something dropping made her turn. Matteo stood in the doorway, his briefcase at his feet, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Tears shimmered in his eyes, catching the last rays of sunset through the window. "I'm sorry," she stammered, clutching the notebook. "I found it while cleaning, and I shouldn't have—" "No," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Those were her words, Camilla's, but the ending, that wasn't in there before?" Olivia nodded, heart pounding. "The songs weren't finished. I hope you don't mind, but they seemed to want completing. Matteo moved slowly into the room, picking up his briefcase as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He sank into his leather chair, eyes fixed on the notebook in her hands. She loved music, he said softly. Always had a song in her head, always writing. She wanted to be a songwriter, but... He trailed off, the weight of unspoken grief filling the space between them. Would you... Olivia hesitated, then gathered her courage. Would you like to hear the rest? When he nodded, she began singing again, her voice stronger now. The song spoke of redemption, of finding hope in unexpected places, of love that transcends loss. As she sang the final verse, the one she'd written, she saw tears rolling freely down Matteo's cheeks. They sat in silence after the last note faded. The cottage creaked softly around them, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. I haven't prayed since she died, Matteo finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not once in 10 years. I couldn't. I was so angry. At God, at myself, at the world that let it happen. Olivia set the notebook aside and moved closer to him, perching on the arm of his chair. I stopped praying too for a long time, she admitted. But then something changed. Maybe... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Maybe I'm here so you can start again. The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Matteo looked up at her, really looked at her, and for the first time saw not just a girl he'd saved, but someone who might be saving him right back. That night, a shift occurred in their quiet companionship. The walls that grief and trauma had built began to crack, letting in slivers of healing light. They sat together in the study until late, sharing stories about Camilla, about their own struggles with faith, about the strange paths that had led them to this moment. When Olivia finally went to bed, she left the notebook on Matteo's desk. He stayed up long after she'd gone, reading through the songs his sister had started and the endings Olivia had given them. Each completed verse felt like a bridge between past and present, between loss and hope. In the quiet of the study, surrounded by his sister's words and the grace of new beginnings, Matteo found himself whispering his first prayer in 10 years. It wasn't eloquent or long, just a simple thank you, but it was enough to start healing a decade-old wound. The storm came without warning, rolling in from the mountains with dark clouds that turned afternoon into evening in minutes. Thunder growled overhead as rain lashed against the cottage windows. Olivia stood at the kitchen sink, watching the wind bend the pine trees almost double. A bright flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack. The cottage plunged into darkness. "Are you okay?" Matteo called from his study. "Yes," Olivia answered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know where the candles are." She felt her way through the familiar kitchen, fingers trailing along countertops until she reached the drawer where they kept emergency supplies. The match flared bright in the darkness, and soon warm candlelight filled the room. She carried several candles through the cottage, setting them carefully on tables and windowsills. When she reached Matteo's study, she found him standing at the window, watching the storm. Lightning illuminated his face for a moment, and she saw the same haunted look he often wore when memories pressed too close. "Would you like a candle in here?" she asked softly. He turned, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you. The power company says it might be out for hours." Olivia nodded, setting a thick pillar candle on his desk. The flame cast dancing shadows on the walls, reminding her of other dark nights when she'd had nothing but candlelight for comfort. But those memories didn't sting as much anymore. Back in her room, she retrieved a small leather-bound journal from beneath her pillow. It wasn't much to look at, just a simple notebook she'd found in the cottage's library. But over the past weeks, it had become her sanctuary, a place to pour out her thoughts and prayers. She carried it to the kitchen table, where several candles created a pool of gentle light. Opening to a fresh page, she began to write. Dear Lord, the storm tonight reminds me of how far I've come. There was a time when darkness meant fear, when thunder felt like danger. But here, in this place you led me to, I'm learning that storms can bring beauty too. They water the earth, clear the air, make way for new growth. Is that what you're doing with my heart? With his? I see how pain has shaped us both, how we carry our scars like armor. But maybe, like the storm, the hurt has a purpose. Maybe it's preparing us for something new. She paused, listening to the rain drum against the roof. Words flowed from her pen as naturally as breathing. Forgiveness isn't freedom from pain. It's the choice to live despite it, to take what broke us and let it become the foundation for something stronger. I'm beginning to understand that now. The chains that once bound me, they're becoming stepping stones. Thunder rolled again, but softer now, more distant. Olivia continued writing, losing track of time as she filled pages with verses that brought her comfort, with prayers for Matteo's healing, with reflections on grace and second chances. When her eyes grew heavy, she closed the journal and went to bed, forgetting it on the kitchen table in her tiredness. Morning came with the fresh-washed feeling that follows a storm. Sunlight streamed through windows still spotted with raindrops, creating tiny rainbows on the walls. The power had returned sometime during the night. Matteo rose early, as always. He made his way to the kitchen for coffee, stopping short when he saw the leather journal on the table. He recognized it as Olivia's. He'd seen her writing in it sometimes, though she always kept it private. He shouldn't look. He knew that. But something about the open way it lay there, bathed in morning light, drew him closer. Just a glimpse, he told himself, picking it up carefully. His eyes fell on the words about forgiveness and pain. They hit him like a physical force, speaking directly to the guilt he'd carried for 10 years. He sank into a chair, reading more. Sometimes I think about the auction, about that moment when everything changed. I was so sure it was another ending, but God turned it into a beginning. He sent someone who understands brokenness, who's fighting his own battles with forgiveness. Lord, help him see that saving me doesn't have to be about making up for the past. Let him know that healing comes from moving forward, not looking back. Oh! Olivia's soft exclamation made him jump. She stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, face flushing red with embarrassment. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave it out. No, I'm sorry, Matteo said quickly, closing the journal. I shouldn't have read it without asking. But instead of looking upset, Olivia's expression softened. What did you think? She asked quietly, sitting down across from him. Matteo ran his fingers over the journal's worn cover. It gave me hope, he admitted. The way you write about forgiveness, about pain having purpose. I've never thought about it that way. Outside, birds sang in the rain-fresh morning. Inside, something shifted in the air between them, like a door opening that had long been closed. Would you like some coffee? Matteo asked. When Olivia nodded, he poured 2 cups, and they sat together at the kitchen table. What does freedom mean to you? He asked suddenly. Real freedom, not just what happened at the auction. Olivia wrapped her hands around the warm mug, thinking carefully before answering. I used to think freedom meant having no pain, no past to carry. But now I think it's about choosing how to carry it. It's about finding purpose in the pain, letting it make you stronger instead of bitter. Like the storm, Matteo said softly. Destructive but necessary for growth. Yes. Olivia smiled, surprised and pleased that he understood. And like faith, it's not about having all the answers. It's about trusting that even when we can't see the purpose, there is one. They talked for hours as the morning brightened around them, about faith and doubt, about loss and hope, about the weight of the past and the possibility of future. Olivia shared stories from her journal, and Matteo opened up about his struggles, with prayer, with guilt, with letting go. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, and in its wake, something new had begun to grow, a fragile understanding, a shared journey toward healing, a light that neither of them had expected to find. Sunday morning dawned with a pearly grey light filtering through wisps of fog. Matteo stood at his bedroom window, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. He hadn't worn a suit to church in 10 years, not since that terrible day when they'd buried Camilla. Down the hall he heard Olivia's quiet footsteps. She appeared in the kitchen wearing a simple blue dress they'd bought in town last week. Her face brightened when she saw him. "You look nice," she said softly, smoothing her skirt. Matteo managed a tight smile. "Ready?" The drive to town was silent, except for the gentle patter of early morning drizzle on the windshield. The small stone church sat nestled among oak trees, its weathered spire reaching toward the cloudy sky. Matteo's hands tightened on the steering wheel as memories washed over him. Camilla singing in the choir, their mother's gentle smile, happier times before everything fell apart. "We don't have to go in," Olivia said quietly, reading his tension. "No," Matteo replied, his voice rough. "It's time." They slipped into a back pew just as the organ began playing. The familiar hymns wrapped around him like old friends, bringing both comfort and pain. When the congregation stood to sing "Amazing Grace," Matteo remained seated, his throat too tight for words. Olivia didn't pressure him to stand or sing. She simply stayed beside him, her presence steady and understanding. The pastor's sermon was about redemption, how God could take broken pieces and create something beautiful. Matteo felt tears sliding down his cheeks, but couldn't wipe them away. His hands lay clenched in his lap, knuckles white. Memories of Camilla flooded his mind, her laugh, her music, her fierce determination to help others. The weight of his failure to protect her pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. But through his tears, he watched Olivia from the corner of his eye. She sat with her head bowed, lips moving in silent prayer, and something in his heart shifted. When the service ended, they waited until most people had left before standing. The pastor nodded to them from across the sanctuary, but seemed to sense they needed space. "Thank you," Matteo whispered to Olivia as they stepped outside. "For coming with me." She squeezed his arm gently. "Thank you for bringing me." Instead of heading home, Matteo turned the car onto a country road leading out of town. The rain had picked up, creating a silver curtain around them. After about 15 minutes, he pulled onto a gravel drive that ended at an empty field. "I want to show you something," he said, grabbing an umbrella from the back seat. They stood together under the umbrella, looking out over the 10-acre plot. Wild grass swayed in the rain, dotted with early spring wildflowers. "I bought this land last week," Matteo said, his voice growing stronger. "I've been thinking about it for a while, but meeting you, it made everything clear." Olivia listened intently as he continued. "I want to build a shelter here, not just a building, but a real haven, with counseling services, job training, everything women need to rebuild their lives after abuse and trafficking." His words came faster now, filled with passion. "There will be gardens, art therapy spaces, a music room, places to heal and grow. The Haven Foundation," he said softly. "That's what I want to call it." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. For Camilla? She asked gently. Matteo nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he found his voice again, it was thick with emotion. She always wanted to help people. She had such a big heart. I thought, maybe this way her spirit can still make a difference. The rain fell steadily around them, but neither moved. Olivia reached for Matteo's hand, squeezing it gently. She would be so proud, she whispered. I hope so, he replied. I've spent 10 years trying to buy my way out of guilt, but this feels different. This feels right. They stood there together, watching the rain paint silver patterns on the grass. Matteo could almost hear Camilla's voice in the wind, could almost see her smile in the way the clouds parted to let through rays of sunlight. When they finally returned to the cottage, they were both drenched despite the umbrella. But neither rushed inside. Instead, they stood on the porch, watching the soft drizzle create ripples in the puddles. You know, Olivia said thoughtfully, sometimes the best way to heal isn't to forget the past, but to use it to help others. Matteo looked at her, really looked at her. This young woman who had endured so much, yet maintained such wisdom and grace. For the first time in years, he felt something like peace settling in his chest. A smile spread across his face, small but genuine. Water dripped from his hair, but he didn't mind. Standing there in the rain with Olivia, discussing plans to help others heal, he felt like he was finally doing something that mattered, something that would make Camilla proud. The rain continued its gentle song around them, but it no longer felt like tears from heaven. Instead, it felt like blessing, like cleansing, like new life waiting to bloom. The early spring sun warmed the earth as bulldozers cleared the land for the Haven Foundation. Matteo stood at the edge of the property, blueprints in hand, watching his dream take shape. Beside him, Olivia knelt in the fresh dirt, carefully planting purple and yellow pansies along what would become the entrance path. These will bloom all year, she said softly, patting the soil around a delicate flower. Even in winter, they'll remind people that beauty can survive the cold. Weeks flowed by like a gentle stream. The foundation's main building rose from the ground. Warm, welcoming structure of brick and wood that looked more like a home than an institution. Olivia spent hours working with the interior designers, insisting on soft colors and comfortable furnishings. The women who come here need to feel safe, she explained to Matteo one evening as they reviewed fabric samples. Not like they're in another facility. She ran her fingers over a plush blanket in gentle cream. Everything should whisper peace. The media's attention shifted as construction progressed. Where there had once been scandalous headlines about Matteo's auction purchase, now there were thoughtful pieces about redemption and second chances. Reporters interviewed construction workers who spoke about Matteo's daily visits, how he knew everyone by name, how he often brought coffee and listened to their stories. One morning, Matteo found Olivia in what would become the therapy garden. She was on her knees, surrounded by trays of seedlings, lavender, rosemary, and healing herbs. The scents will help, she explained, not looking up from her work. Sometimes when words are too hard, beauty can speak instead. He watched her careful movements, remembering how she'd trembled that first night at the cottage. Now she moved with quiet purpose, her hand steady as she nurtured new life from the earth. I want you to speak at the opening gala, he said suddenly, Olivia's hand stilled in the dirt. Matteo, Her voice wavered. You don't have to tell your story, he assured her quickly. But your heart is in every brick of this place. People need to hear your voice. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers gently touching a lavender leaf. Will there be cameras? Yes, he admitted. But you'll be speaking truth, Olivia, and truth has its own power. She took a deep breath, then nodded. Okay. The next few weeks were filled with preparation. The foundation building was completed, furnished, and filled with trained staff. Gardens bloomed under Olivia's careful attention. Local churches and women's organizations pledged support. The night of the opening gala arrived clear and cool. The foundation's great room was filled with soft lighting and the gentle sound of classical music. Donors, reporters, and community leaders mingled, admiring the peaceful space. Olivia stood backstage, wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes shine. Her hands trembled as she held her notes, but her voice was steady when she whispered, "I'm ready." Matteo introduced her with pride in his voice. "Someone very special helped me understand what this place needed to be. Please welcome Olivia Madden." The room fell silent as she stepped to the podium. Camera lights flashed, but she kept her eyes on her notes, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Redemption isn't something you can buy," she began softly. "I learned that here, watching this place grow from empty land into a sanctuary." Her voice grew stronger. Mr. Rowe could have built anything with his resources. Instead, he chose to create a place of healing. She looked up then, meeting the audience's eyes. Redemption doesn't care how much money you have. It only asks if you're willing to change, to take your broken pieces and build something beautiful for others. Matteo watched from the side, his heart full. He saw strength in her straight shoulders, grace in her gentle smile. She was no longer the frightened girl from the auction. She had bloomed like her gardens, strong and healing. The audience's applause was genuine and warm. Reporters scribbled notes, their faces thoughtful rather than hungry for scandal. Even the most cynical donors seemed moved. But in the back of the room, partially hidden behind a pillar, Samuel Crane stood with a camera in his hands and ice in his eyes. His expensive coat blended with the shadows as he took photo after photo, his smirk growing colder with each click. Matteo didn't notice him. He was focused on Olivia as she finished her speech, her final words floating over the crowd like a blessing. The Haven Foundation isn't just a building, it's a promise that broken things can be made whole again. The applause swelled again. Olivia stepped back from the podium, her cheeks flushed with emotion. When she reached Matteo's side, he squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you," he whispered. She smiled up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "No," she replied softly. "Thank you for showing me that change is possible." The evening continued with tours of the facility, donors pledging support, and media interviews that focused on hope rather than scandal. The Foundation's staff shared their vision for the programs they would offer: counseling, job training, legal aid, and, most importantly, a safe place to heal. Throughout it all, Olivia moved quietly through the crowd, answering questions about the gardens and explaining the thought behind each peaceful detail. Her gentle presence seemed to touch everyone she spoke with, drawing smiles and nods of understanding. Matteo watched it all with a sense of peace he hadn't known since before Camilla's death. This wasn't just a project anymore, it was a mission, a calling, a way to turn past pain into future hope. The last guests departed as the moon rose over the Foundation's new gardens. Olivia's pansies nodded in the evening breeze, their faces turned toward the stars. The building glowed softly, ready to begin its work of healing. What none of them saw was Samuel Crane in his car at the end of the long driveway, reviewing his photos with calculated interest. His finger paused on an image of Olivia speaking at the podium, her face alight with conviction. A cold smile played at his lips as he tucked the camera away and started his engine. The morning dawned grey and heavy with unshed snow. Matteo sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reading emails on his tablet, while Olivia hummed softly as she made breakfast. The peaceful routine they'd built over the past weeks wrapped around them like a warm blanket. The sharp ring of Matteo's phone shattered the quiet. His face darkened as he listened. "Turn on the news," he said hoarsely, reaching for the remote. The television flickered to life, and their world collapsed. Breaking news. Disturbing allegations surface against billionaire Matteo Rowe and his recently opened Haven Foundation. The anchor's voice was clinical, professional. Documents leaked by former business partner Samuel Crane suggest the foundation may be a front for human trafficking operations. Olivia's spatula clattered to the floor. On screen, Samuel Crane stood before microphones, his face a mask of concerned citizenship. "I couldn't stay silent any longer," he said, his voice dripping false sincerity. "The evidence suggests Mr. Rowe has been using charitable donations to fund an underground network trafficking vulnerable young women." The screen split to show surveillance photos. Matteo at the auction where he'd found Olivia, documents with highlighted sections about acquiring assets, financial records doctored to look suspicious. Worst of all were photos of Olivia herself, her speech at the gala twisted into something sinister. Sources claim this young woman, Olivia Madden, works as Rowe's recruiter, helping to identify potential victims through the foundation's outreach programs. Olivia stumbled backward, her face ash white. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Matteo's phone began ringing non-stop. Board members, lawyers, reporters, all demanding answers. Through the window, they could see news vans already gathering at the gates. "We need to call our lawyers," Matteo said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "This is all lies. We can prove it." But before they could move, heavy knocking echoed through the house. Federal agents stood at the door, badges gleaming. "Mr. Rowe, we need to ask you some questions about the Haven Foundation," the lead agent said, "and we'll need to speak with Miss Madden separately." The next hours passed in a blur of interrogation. In one room, Matteo fought to maintain his composure as agents grilled him about financial records and business connections. In another, Olivia sat trembling as they asked her again and again about her role in the operation. "He saved me," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "He gave me my freedom. The foundation is meant to help people, not hurt them." But the questions kept coming, relentless and cold. Outside, protesters began gathering at the foundation site, their angry voices carried on the winter wind. Signs appeared. "Close Haven now and stop the trafficking." By afternoon, the foundation was sealed with yellow tape. Staff were sent home. The gardens Olivia had planted with such hope lay abandoned under the gathering clouds. Back at the cottage, Matteo paced like a caged lion, talking rapidly with his legal team. "We need injunctions, cease and desist orders. I want Crane's source for those documents. They're obviously forged." Olivia sat silent in the window seat, watching darkness fall. Every news channel showed her face now, painting her as either victim or villain. The beautiful dream of the Haven Foundation lay in ruins around them. She thought of all the women who had been counting on the foundation's help. Women like her, desperate for a chance at healing. Now they would stay trapped in their private hells because she had somehow brought destruction to Matteo's noble project. Tears slid down her cheeks as she watched him fighting to save what they'd built. His reputation was being destroyed. His life's work was crumbling, and it all traced back to that night he'd raised his hand at the auction, trying to save one broken girl. After everyone finally left, silence fell heavy in the cottage. Matteo's shoulders sagged with exhaustion as he stared at his phone, reading message after message from people distancing themselves from him and the foundation. "We'll fight this," he said, not looking at her. "The truth will come out." But Olivia had already made her decision. She waited until deep night, when Matteo finally fell into troubled sleep. Moving silently, she packed a small bag, just clothes, her journal, and the few things she'd accumulated during her months of freedom. Her hands trembled as she wrote the note, tears splashing onto the paper. "You freed me, but I don't want to be your burden. I'm sorry I brought this darkness into your life. Thank you for showing me what kindness looks like. Please forgive me." She placed it on the kitchen table, next to his coffee mug. For a long moment, she stood in the doorway of his study, memorizing the peaceful space where she'd first begun to heal. Then she slipped out into the night, careful not to let the door click behind her. The first snow was just beginning to fall as she walked down the long driveway, thick flakes swirling in the beam of her flashlight. Each step felt like her heart was being torn in two, but she forced herself to keep moving. Better to disappear now than watch Matteo's life completely unravel because of her. Back in the cottage, Matteo stirred restlessly, troubled by dark dreams. When he woke an hour later, some instinct told him something was wrong. He found the note on the table, read it once, twice, 3 times, as if the words might change. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the floor, the paper crumpling in his trembling hands. "No," he whispered. "Please, no." Outside, the snow fell thicker and faster, erasing Olivia's footprints and muffling the world in silent white. It covered the protesters' abandoned signs, the sealed doors of the foundation, the empty gardens, falling endlessly, as if trying to bury all their broken dreams. The morning after Olivia left, frost crept across the cottage windows like delicate spider webs. Inside, silence pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating. Matteo sat motionless in his study, staring at the empty chair where she used to read. Her absence felt like a physical wound. The television droned in the background, news anchors dissecting his downfall with barely concealed glee. Billionaire Matteo Rowe's foundation scandal deepens. He couldn't bring himself to turn it off, letting their words wash over him like acid rain. Sources close to the investigation suggest a pattern of suspicious activities. Questions remain about the young woman at the center of these allegations. The Haven Foundation's future remains uncertain as more allegations surface. Hours blended into days, half-empty coffee cups collected on his desk, gone cold and forgotten. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from his legal team, board members, reporters. He ignored them all. Food held no appeal. Sleep came in restless fragments, haunted by memories of both Olivia and Camilla. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Reynolds, his housekeeper, arrived to find him still wearing the same clothes, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "Mr. Rowe, you need to eat something," she pleaded, setting down a tray of soup that would go untouched. He barely left his study, except to stand in Olivia's doorway, taking in the neat bed, the few belongings she'd left behind. The room still held her scent, lavender and clean cotton. His eyes burned every time he looked at the empty space where her shoes should have been. One evening, as sunset painted the walls in shades of amber and gold, Matteo wandered into the living room. The piano sat silent, gathering dust. He lifted the lid with trembling fingers, remembering how Olivia would sometimes play in the early mornings, soft melodies drifting through the cottage like prayer. His finger pressed a single key, middle C. The note rang out, pure and clear, hanging in the air like a question with no answer. The sound seemed to echo forever in the empty room, like a heartbeat in a hollow chest. He closed the lid, unable to bear any more music. That night, seeking any connection to her, he found himself in her room again. The moonlight spilled across her bed, illuminating something tucked beneath her pillow, her faith journal. He'd seen her writing in it countless times, but had always respected her privacy. Now his hands shook as he opened it. Pages filled with her neat handwriting revealed a soul both wounded and healing. Bible verses, prayers, and reflections on grace filled the margins. Some entries made him catch his breath. Today, Matteo smiled for the first time in weeks. It was like watching sunrise after the longest night. The foundation isn't just about buildings and programs. It's about believing broken things can become beautiful again. Sometimes I think God sent me here not just for my healing, but for His too. Then he found the final entry, written the night she left. The words struck him like physical blows. If I ever leave, it's not because I stopped believing in Him. It's because He needs to find grace for Himself. He keeps trying to save everyone else, but who will save Him? Maybe sometimes we have to lose everything to find what we're really looking for. I pray he understands someday that redemption isn't something you can buy. It's something you have to accept. The journal fell from his numb fingers. He sank to his knees beside her bed, tears finally breaking through the dam he'd built around his heart. All this time, she'd seen right through him, seen how he was trying to buy his way out of guilt, trying to save her to make up for not saving Camilla. Dawn found him in his car, driving aimlessly through the Tennessee countryside. Fields and forests blurred past as he called every shelter within a 100-mile radius. Each call followed the same pattern. Yes, a young woman matching that description was here. She left yesterday morning. No, she didn't say where she was going. We're sorry, we can't help you. Each dead end felt like another failure. Another person he couldn't save. Another chance at redemption slipping through his fingers. The countryside stretched endless and empty before him, much like the hollow space in his chest where hope used to live. Gas stations, diners, bus stations. He showed her photo everywhere. Some recognized her from the news coverage, but no one could tell him where she'd gone. She was always one step ahead, always just beyond reach. Like chasing a ghost through the morning mist. As afternoon faded into evening, he found himself at a small church on the outskirts of town, the same one where they'd attended service together. The parking lot was empty, the building dark. He sat in his car, remembering how she'd squeezed his hand when he'd started crying during the hymns. The truth settled over him like the gathering dusk. He was too late. Again. Just like with Camilla, he'd failed to protect someone who needed him. The wheel beneath his hands felt cold and useless. All his wealth, all his power, all his resources, none of it could bring back what he'd lost. The drive back to the cottage seemed endless. Each mile marker reminded him of another shelter called, another dead end reached. The snow had started again, thick flakes catching in his headlights like falling stars. Somewhere out there, Olivia was alone, probably cold, possibly afraid. And for all his billions, he couldn't find her. The cottage waited in darkness, a shadow against the snowy night. Inside, the silence felt different now, not just empty, but accusing. He stood in the kitchen, staring at her note still on the table, her words from the journal echoing in his mind. He needs to find grace for himself. But how could he find grace when everything he touched seemed to crumble? How could he accept redemption when he kept failing the people he tried to save? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in layers of pristine white that would eventually melt away, leaving only the cold truth beneath. The morning dawned bitter cold, frost etching, delicate patterns across the cottage windows. Matteo sat at his desk, staring blankly at financial reports he couldn't focus on. His coffee had gone cold, untouched like so many meals lately. The sound of tires crunching on gravel made him look up. Through the window, he watched the mail carrier's truck pull away, leaving a few envelopes in the rustic mailbox at the end of the drive. He almost didn't bother checking. What news could matter now? But something pulled him to his feet, drew him out into the biting air. His fingers, numb from more than just cold, shuffled through the stack. Bill. Advertisement. Another bill. Then, his heart stopped. A small cream-colored envelope, addressed in painfully familiar handwriting. The Nashville postmark seemed to pulse against his palm. Inside the cottage, he sank into his chair, hands trembling as he carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside carried a faint scent of vanilla, the same as the candles Olivia used to light in the evenings. His vision blurred as he began to read. Dear Matteo, I hope this letter finds you well, though I know that might not be true right now. First, I need you to know that I'm safe. I'm at St. Mary's Church Shelter in Nashville, helping other girls find their way back to life, just like you helped me find mine. The newspapers are still writing terrible things about you and the foundation. I see them sometimes, and my heart breaks knowing I played a part in bringing this pain into your life. But then I remember something important, something I learned watching you these past months. You didn't buy me, Matteo. You found me. And maybe that's what love does. It finds what the world threw away. It sees value where others see broken pieces. Just like you saw something worth saving in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. The girls here remind me so much of myself when I first arrived at your door. Scared, untrusting, believing they're beyond hope. But now I can share with them what you taught me. That grace isn't earned, it's given. That healing starts with believing you deserve it. I know you're probably wondering why I left. The truth is, I couldn't bear watching you sacrifice everything trying to protect me. Your reputation, your company, the foundation. It was all crumbling because of me. But more than that, I saw how you were drowning in guilt. Not just over me, but over Camilla too. You've spent so many years trying to save everyone else, Matteo. Maybe it's time to let yourself be saved too. The cottage taught me that sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest truths. Listen to them. Remember what you told me that first night? You're free. No conditions, no debts. Those words changed my life. Now I'm saying them back to you. You're free, Matteo. Free from guilt. Free from the weight of everyone you couldn't save. Free to find grace. Not by buying it or earning it, but by simply accepting it. I'm praying for you, just like I have every day since I met you. And I'm helping other girls find their way home, because that's what you taught me to do, to take broken things and make them beautiful again, with gratitude and hope, Olivia. The letter fell from his shaking hands. Something inside him, something hard and frozen that had been there since Camilla's death, cracked open. Tears came in waves, unstoppable now. He slid from his chair to his knees, pressing his forehead against the cool wood of the desk. God, he whispered, his voice rough with disuse and emotion. God, I don't know how to do this anymore. The words came haltingly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. I thought I could fix everything with money, build enough shelters, save enough girls. And maybe it would make up for not saving her, for not seeing what was happening to Camilla until it was too late. His shoulders shook as years of buried grief poured out. I'm so tired of carrying this, so tired of trying to buy my way out of guilt. Please, please help me. Show me how to accept what I couldn't change. Show me how to find the grace Olivia talks about. The prayer ended in quiet sobs, but something had shifted in the room, in his heart. The silence felt different now, less empty, more like peace. He stayed there until his knees ached and his tears ran dry, feeling lighter than he had in years. As evening approached, he moved with new purpose. He packed a suitcase methodically, clothes, toiletries, Olivia's letter carefully folded in his jacket pocket. The weather report warned of heavy snow, but he couldn't wait another day. The drive to Nashville usually took 2 hours, but the snow made everything slower, more deliberate. His headlights cut through the falling flakes like threads of hope, illuminating the way forward one small section at a time. The darkness pressed in around him, but for once it didn't feel threatening. It felt like possibility. In his mind, Olivia's words played on repeat. You didn't buy me. You found me. Maybe that's what he'd been doing wrong all these years. Trying to purchase redemption instead of simply accepting it. Trying to save others instead of letting himself be found. The snow fell harder as he drove, but he pressed on, guided by something stronger than weather or logic. Each mile marker brought him closer to Nashville, closer to Olivia, closer to whatever grace waited at the end of this road. His headlights caught the city limits sign through the swirling white. Nashville waited ahead, and somewhere in its heart, a church shelter held the beginning of his own salvation. The woman who had taught him about grace was there, helping others find their way home. Now, finally, he was ready to find his way too. The neon sign flickered against the darkening sky, casting intermittent blue light across snow-dusted steps. Grace Haven. The building itself was weathered brick, 3 stories tall, with windows that glowed warm yellow against the winter evening. Matteo sat in his car. For several long minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding against his ribs. Through the front window, he could see movement, shadows of people going about their evening routine. Somewhere in there was Olivia. The thought made his throat tight. Finally, he stepped out into the cold, his expensive shoes crunching in the fresh snow. The contrast between his tailored suit and the humble surroundings felt stark, almost embarrassing. But he forced himself forward, one step at a time. The front door creaked as he entered. The smell hit him first, warm soup, fresh bread, and underneath it all, the lingering scent of old wood and furniture polish. The entrance opened into a large room where folding tables were set up in neat rows. Women of various ages sat scattered throughout, some alone, others in small groups, all hunched over steaming bowls. And there she was. Olivia stood behind a serving counter, ladling soup into bowls with practiced care. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, wisps escaping around her face. She wore a plain blue apron over jeans and a sweater, but something about her seemed different, more settled, more sure. She looked up as he approached, and the ladle clattered against the pot. Matteo. Her whisper carried across the quiet room. Several heads turned to look. You shouldn't be here, she said, but her voice held more concern than anger. She quickly handed the ladle to another volunteer and stepped around the counter, guiding him toward a quieter corner near the kitchen. Up close, he could see the shadows under her eyes, but also a new strength in the way she carried herself. This wasn't the same frightened girl who had fled the cottage. This was someone who had found her footing. I know, he said softly. But I needed to see you, not to take you back. He added quickly, seeing her expression. I came because you were right. About everything. She studied his face, arms crossed protectively across her chest. Right about what? About redemption. About grace. He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find the right words. You said I had to prove redemption was for me, too. Let me try, please. A woman called from the kitchen. Olivia, we need more bread out here. Just a minute, she called back, then turned to Matteo. This isn't a place for guilt or grand gestures. It's just people helping people. Then let me help, he said simply. Not with money, not with plans or foundations, just me, my hands, my time. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded towards the kitchen. We need help cleaning up after dinner service. Think you can handle a mop? The hint of teasing in her voice made his heart lift. I'm willing to learn. For the next 2 hours, Matteo worked alongside Olivia and the other volunteers. He rolled up his sleeves and washed dishes until his fingers pruned. He wiped tables, swept floors, and learned the proper way to mop from a grandmother volunteer named Ruth, who didn't hesitate to correct his technique. As they worked, Olivia told him about the shelter, how it operated on donations and volunteer power, how they offered not just meals but counseling, job training, and most importantly, community. She spoke with quiet passion about the women she'd met, their strength, their stories. "Remember what you told me that first night at the cottage?" she asked as they stacked chairs. "About being free, no conditions." He nodded. "Well, that's what we try to give here. Not just food or shelter, but freedom. Freedom to heal at their own pace. Freedom to find their way back to themselves." A young woman passed by with her small daughter, both carrying cookies from dessert. The little girl waved shyly at Olivia, who waved back with a warm smile. "That's Maria and Sophie," she said softly. "They came here 3 weeks ago. Sophie hadn't spoken a word in months. Yesterday she sang during our morning circle time." Matteo watched as mother and daughter settled at a corner table, sharing their cookie and giggling together. Something in his chest ached, but it was a different kind of pain than he was used to. Not the sharp stab of guilt, but something softer, more hopeful. As the evening wound down, they found themselves at the back door, taking out trash bags. The snow was falling again, fat flakes catching in Olivia's hair. "You're good at this," he said suddenly. "At taking out trash." She raised an eyebrow. "At helping people feel safe. At creating peace." He gestured vaguely at the building behind them. "I tried to fix everything with money and plans, but you just love people. Simply. Directly." She was quiet for a moment, watching the snow fall. "It's not about being good at it. It's about being willing to try, to show up, to stay even when it's messy." They walked back inside, stomping snow from their shoes. The shelter was quieting down for the night. Most residents headed up to their rooms. A few volunteers were finishing final cleanup tasks. "I should go," Matteo said, though everything in him wanted to stay. "Yes, you should." Olivia's voice was gentle but firm. He hesitated at the door. "Could I? Would it be all right if I came back tomorrow?" She looked at him carefully, searchingly. "If you're willing to serve, not save," she said finally. "This isn't about redemption through grand gestures, Matteo. It's about small acts of kindness day after day. It's about learning to accept grace by giving it freely to others." "I understand," he said, and for the first time he truly did. "I'll bring my own apron." That earned him a laugh, soft but genuine, like sunshine breaking through clouds. The sound wrapped around his heart like a warm blanket. "Good night, Matteo," she said, holding the door. "Good night, Olivia." As he walked to his car, the snow falling silently around him, he felt lighter than he had in years. The neon sign still flickered overhead. Grace Haven. Maybe grace wasn't something you had to earn or buy. Maybe it was like this snow, falling freely, covering everything in clean white, offering everyone the chance to begin again. The courthouse steps loomed before Matteo like a mountain he had to climb. Dozens of reporters gathered below, their cameras already flashing like lightning in a storm. The morning air was crisp, carrying the last bite of winter even as spring tried to push through. He straightened his tie, a simple blue one Olivia had chosen. "For truth," she'd said, smoothing it against his chest that morning at the shelter. Now, standing in the harsh light of public scrutiny, he drew strength from that small gesture of faith. The microphones created a forest of metal and plastic before him. Matteo took a deep breath, unfolded his prepared statement, then set it aside. The truth didn't need neat paragraphs or carefully crafted phrases. 10 years ago. he began, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. My sister Camilla died. She was 18 years old, trapped in an abusive relationship I didn't see until it was too late. I was too busy building my empire to notice her bruises, too focused on success to hear her crying at night. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. Several reporters leaned forward, sensing this wasn't the standard damage control they'd expected. When I attended that auction last month, I wasn't looking for redemption. I wasn't even looking for a cause. But when I saw Olivia Madden on that stage, I saw my sister's eyes looking back at me. I saw another young woman the world had failed to protect. He paused, his hands gripping the podium. Yes, I paid an obscene amount of money that night. Yes, I took her to my cottage outside the city, but not for the reasons Mr. Crane's allegations suggest. I did it because 10 years ago, I couldn't save my sister, and this time, I couldn't walk away. The crowd had grown completely still. Even the most hardened reporters seemed caught in the raw honesty of his words. What I didn't expect was that Olivia would end up saving me. His voice cracked slightly. Through her quiet strength, her unwavering faith, and her capacity for forgiveness, she showed me that redemption isn't something you can buy. It's something you have to live. In the back of the crowd, he spotted Olivia standing with some of the shelter volunteers. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back, her eyes steady on his. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. The Haven Foundation was born from this truth, not as a way to clear my conscience or rebuild my reputation, but as a commitment to breaking cycles of abuse and offering genuine sanctuary to those who need it most. Every detail of our operations, our finances, and our programs is open for investigation. He squared his shoulders. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to tell the truth. And the truth is, I spent years trying to fill the hole my sister's death left with money and power. It took a broken girl with an unbroken spirit to show me what real healing looks like. Questions erupted from the crowd. Matteo answered each one directly, holding nothing back. He spoke about finding Olivia's scars, about her faith journal, about her work at Grace Haven. With each honest response, the skepticism in reporters' eyes began to shift to something else, understanding, perhaps even respect. Within days, the investigation crumbled. Federal agents found no evidence of trafficking or misconduct. Instead, they uncovered a trail of forged documents leading straight back to Samuel Crane. His attempt to destroy Matteo had backfired spectacularly. Crane was arrested trying to board a private plane to the Cayman Islands. The press had a field day with his fall from grace, but Matteo refused to comment on his former partner's fate. This isn't about revenge, he told reporters. It's about restoration. The Haven Foundation's reopening ceremony was held on a bright spring morning. The building gleamed in the sunlight, a modern 3-story structure with warm brick and large windows. Gardens surrounded it, already sprouting early flowers thanks to Olivia's careful planning. Inside, the walls were painted in soft, calming colors. Each room had been designed with both security and comfort in mind. The counseling center, job training facilities, and residential wings all reflected the dual mission of protection and empowerment. Olivia stood before the mirror in her new office, hardly recognizing herself. The board member nameplate on her desk still seemed surreal. She smoothed her hands over her navy blazer. Professional but approachable, just as she'd hoped. A knock at the door made her turn. Matteo stood there, holding a small gift box. For luck, he said, holding it out. Inside was a delicate silver pendant, a key with a tiny heart worked into its design. Because you helped me unlock mine, he explained softly. Tears pricked at her eyes as she fastened it around her neck. I'm scared, she admitted. What if I'm not ready for this responsibility? You've been ready since the day you insisted on having purpose at the cottage. He smiled. Remember, She touched the pendant, drawing strength from its weight. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for teaching me how. Together, they walked to the front entrance where crowds had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. News crews jostled for position. Former shelter residents stood proudly alongside community leaders and donors. Olivia's hands trembled as she gripped the large ceremonial scissors. Without a word, Matteo stepped closer, steadying her grip with his own hands. The gesture spoke volumes, about trust, about partnership, about healing. Ready, he whispered. She nodded, and together they cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, rising to their feet in a wave of support. As cameras flashed and reporters called questions, Olivia looked out at the faces before her. She saw hope there, and possibility, and most importantly, she saw community. The Haven Foundation wasn't just a building or a program. It was proof that broken things could be made beautiful again. That truth could overcome lies. That grace, freely given, could change everything. Standing there in the morning sun, with Matteo beside her and a future full of purpose ahead, Olivia finally understood what true freedom meant. It wasn't about escaping the past. It was about transforming it into something that could help others find their way home. The late September breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and river water through downtown Nashville. From her 7th-floor apartment, Olivia could see the Cumberland River winding its way through the city like a silver ribbon catching the evening light. The view still took her breath away, even after 3 months of living here. She'd decorated the space simply but thoughtfully. Soft cream walls adorned with artwork created by survivors from her therapy sessions, colorful throw pillows brightening the second-hand furniture, and potted plants soaking up sunlight on every windowsill. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. Every choice, every detail reflecting the freedom she'd found. The art therapy room at the Haven Foundation had become her sanctuary. 4 afternoons each week, she sat with women and girls who carried scars like the ones that marked her own skin. Together, they painted their pain, sketched their hopes, and molded their fears into something beautiful. Through gentle encouragement and quiet understanding, she watched them discover their voices, brush stroke by brush stroke. Sometimes healing looks like a mess of colors, she often told them. But that's okay. Art isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. The knock at her door that evening was familiar. 3 soft taps that could only be Matteo. She opened it to find him holding 2 paper cups from her favorite tea shop, his tie loosened after a long day at the office. "Chai latte with extra cinnamon," he said, offering her one of the cups. "I remembered." "You always do." She smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "Rough day?" He shrugged, following her toward the balcony. "Board meetings, budget reviews, the usual corporate dance." His eyes swept over her latest painting propped on an easel, abstract swirls of blue and gold. "This is new. It's beautiful. One of my girls inspired it," Olivia said softly. "She told me that's how hope feels to her now, like light breaking through water." They settled into the weathered wooden chairs on the balcony, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The city stretched before them, a maze of lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Several stories below, cars crawled along the streets like bright beetles, their headlights creating rivers of light. Olivia tucked her legs beneath her, wrapping both hands around her warm cup. She studied Matteo's profile in the fading light. The harsh lines that had marked his face when they first met had softened somehow. The weight of guilt he'd carried for so long seemed lighter, though not entirely gone. "I have something for you," she said after a while, setting down her tea. She disappeared inside for a moment, returning with a worn leather journal, Her faith journal filled now from cover to cover with prayers, verses, and reflections on grace. Matteo looked at it questioningly as she held it out to him. "It's finished," she explained. "And I think you need it more than I do now." His hands trembled slightly as he took it, running his fingers over the soft leather cover. He'd seen glimpses of its contents before, but never the whole story. Her whole journey. "You can stop paying for what you couldn't change," she said softly, her voice gentle but firm. "Start living for what you can redeem." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. Matteo's eyes filled with tears as he clutched the journal to his chest. "You were never the one who needed saving, Olivia," he whispered hoarsely. "I was." She reached across the space between their chairs and squeezed his hand. No more words were needed. They sat in comfortable silence as night settled over the city, the river below reflecting the stars that managed to shine through Nashville's light pollution. Later, as the first hints of dawn began to pale the eastern sky, they moved inside. Olivia made fresh tea, chamomile this time, and they settled on her small couch near the window. Matteo had been reading passages from her journal, occasionally wiping his eyes or pausing to collect himself. "Listen to this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He read aloud. "Grace isn't about deserving. It's about receiving what we could never earn and giving what we once thought we could never spare." Olivia smiled, remembering writing those words late one night at the cottage. "I was thinking about you when I wrote that," she admitted. "About how you tried so hard to buy redemption, when all along it was free." The sky outside her window began to lighten, darkness giving way to soft purple, then pink, then gold. They watched the sunrise together, 2 cups of cooling tea between them, 2 hearts no longer trapped by the past, but alive in grace. The morning light spilled across her hardwood floors, catching the silver key pendant she still wore every day. It reminded her of how far they'd both come, from that dark auction house to this moment of peace, from guilt and fear to purpose and hope. Matteo closed the journal gently, reverently. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes held volumes more. Olivia nodded, understanding all that remained unspoken between them. They had both been transformed by their journey, she into a woman who could help others find their voice, he into a man who had finally found his heart. As the sun rose fully over Nashville, painting the river in shades of gold, they sat in companionable silence. The city was waking, up around them, but in that moment time seemed to stand still, a perfect pause between what was and what could be, between healing and hope, between darkness and dawn. "Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."